10-year-old twin girls crash millionaire's wedding and hand over a folder containing a DNA test. Before we begin, let us know in the comments where in the world you're tuning in from. Enjoy the journey. The Plaza Hotel ballroom shimmered under crystal chandeliers, the kind of opulence that made even New York's elite catch their breath. Alexander Montgomery stood tall at the altar, his tailored tuxedo accentuating his athletic frame, dark hair perfectly styled, and blue eyes, the trademark Montgomery blue, fixed on his bride. Victoria Reynolds floated down the aisle in a designer gown that cost more than most people's homes. The pharmaceutical heiress was the perfect match on paper, beautiful, connected, wealthy in her own right. The high society pages had dubbed them Manhattan's power couple, and today's wedding was the culmination of two dynasties joining forces. "We are gathered here today," the officiant began, his voice resonating through the packed ballroom where governors, senators, and Wall Street titans sat shoulder to shoulder. Alexander, at 35, had built Montgomery Investments into a financial powerhouse that even his father, William, hadn't imagined possible. This wedding was the final piece of his meticulously constructed life. Yet something felt hollow behind his practiced smile, a sensation he'd buried under boardroom, victories, and acquisition deals. Victoria squeezed his hand, her diamond engagement ring catching the light. He returned the gesture automatically, scanning the sea of expensive suits and designer dresses. His mother Eleanor sat regally in the front row, nodding with approval at the union she had helped orchestrate. The ceremony proceeded with clockwork, precision until those fateful words hung in the air. "If anyone can show just cause why this couple cannot lawfully be joined together, speak now or forever hold your peace." A brief commotion at the back doors drew confused glances. Two small figures darted past security guards, followed by a flustered woman in a staff uniform. Alexander squinted, trying to make sense of the interruption. Two identical girls, no more than 10 years old, stood at the end of the aisle. Their matching blue dresses and neatly brushed brown hair gave them the appearance of dolls come to life. One clutched a folder to her chest protectively. "With license, we need to speak with Mr. Montgomery," the first girl announced, her voice surprisingly steady, despite the hundreds of eyes now fixed upon her. "We have something important to deliver," added her twin, holding up the folder. Victoria's perfectly manicured nails dug into Alexander's palm. "What is this?" she whispered harshly. Before security could intervene, Alexander raised his hand, silencing the murmurs rippling through the crowd. Something about the girl's determined expressions compelled him forward. "It's okay," he assured Victoria, though uncertainty laced his voice. "Let me see what this is about." As he approached the girls, the resemblance struck him like a physical blow. Those eyes, Montgomery blue. His mother gasped audibly from the front row, clearly seeing it too. "What can I do for you, young ladies?" he asked, kneeling to their level. The girl with the folder stepped forward. "My name is Olivia, and this is my sister Emma," she said, glancing at her twin. "We believe you're our father." The ballroom erupted, Victoria's face drained of color, her expression morphing from confusion to horror to rage. Eleanor Montgomery rose shakily from her seat, steadying herself against William's arm. Alexander remained frozen, the girl's words echoing in his mind as he stared into eyes that mirrored his own. Somewhere in his memory, a face surfaced, soft brown hair, a brilliant smile whispered promises in a Boston apartment. "Sophia," he breathed, too quietly for anyone but the girls to hear. "That's our mom," Emma confirmed, her small chin lifting proudly. The photographer's flash captured the moment that Alexander Montgomery's perfectly ordered world began to crumble, and perhaps, though he couldn't know it yet, started to rebuild into something far more genuine. Victoria's face contorted with fury as she ripped her veil off, tears of rage streaking her perfectly applied makeup. "It's over, Alexander. How could you humiliate me like this?" Her voice pierced through the stunned silence of the ballroom. The elegant bride became a whirlwind of white silk and fury as she stormed down the aisle, her mother and father rushing to follow. Guests began to rise from their seats, a wave of whispers and shocked expressions washing through the Plaza Hotel's grand ballroom. Alexander stood frozen, his mind racing to process what was happening. These girls, these children with his eyes, had just decimated his wedding day with 3 simple words. "You're our father." "Victoria." "Wait," he called after her, but his fiancée didn't even turn. The heavy doors slammed behind her with finality. Eleanor, Montgomery, always the picture of composure even in crisis, approached the twins. Her critical gaze swept over them, lingering on their faces. The Montgomery blue eyes, the genetic trait that had defined their family for generations, stared back at her from both children. "Where did you come from?" Eleanor asked, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. Emma, slightly taller than her sister and seemingly the more outspoken of the two, answered directly, "We live in Boston with our mother. We took the train here with our Aunt Claire." She gestured toward the woman in event staff attire who had slipped in with them. Claire stepped forward nervously. "I'm Sophia's sister. I work for the event company. I helped them because they were determined to do this with or without me." Alexander finally broke from his trance and moved to follow Victoria. His younger brother James intercepted him, gripping his shoulder firmly. "Let her go, Alex," James advised, his expression uncharacteristically serious. "That situation," he nodded toward Victoria's retreating figure, "needs time regardless, but this," he looked meaningfully at the twins, "needs your attention now." The girls stood their ground amid the disintegrating wedding, remarkably composed for children their age. Olivia held out the folder again. "We have pictures and papers inside. Mom doesn't know we're here." Daniel Parker, Alexander's best man and closest friend since prep school, stepped up to manage the situation. "Ladies and gentlemen," he addressed the confused guests with practiced charm, "it appears we're experiencing some unexpected developments. Perhaps we could all proceed to the reception area where refreshments are waiting." As the guests filed out, some concerned, others barely concealing their delight at the scandal unfolding, Alexander felt the weight of dozens of phone cameras capturing the moment. By tomorrow, this would be splashed across every tabloid in the country. William. Montgomery, Alexander's father, approached slowly. Heart problems had forced him to step back from the company years ago, passing the reins to Alexander earlier than planned. Now, his face showed concern rather than anger. "Son," he said quietly, "let's move this conversation somewhere private." 20 minutes later, the wedding party had disbanded, and the key players gathered in a private library within the hotel. Alexander had loosened his bow tie, feeling as though he might suffocate. Emma and Olivia sat together on a leather sofa, still clutching their precious folder. Eleanor stood by the window, her expression unreadable, while William sat heavily in an armchair. "May I?" Alexander asked, gesturing to the folder. His voice sounded strange to his own ears. Olivia handed it over solemnly. "It's not official DNA tests," she explained. "Just some ancestry genetic tests we modified to show compatibility." Alexander raised an eyebrow. "You modified genetic tests?" Emma couldn't suppress a proud smile. "We're good with computers, and science is our best subject." Inside the folder, Alexander found printouts of genetic profiles, family trees with his name highlighted, and several photographs. His breath caught when he saw Sophia's face, older than he remembered, but unmistakably her. The brilliant medical student he'd fallen for almost 11 years ago. "How did you find me?" he asked, his fingers tracing the outline of Sophia's face in one photo. "Mom keeps an old memory box with your name and pictures," Emma explained. "She never told us about you, so we started investigating online." "Aunt Claire works for the event company," Olivia continued. "When we found out she was working on your wedding, we knew it was our chance." Claire, standing nervously by the door, added, "I tried to talk them out of it, but they're determined when they set their minds to something." Alexander looked up at the familiar quality in Sophia's sister. She'd been younger when he knew her, but now he recognized the family resemblance. "You could have contacted me privately, Claire." She met his gaze steadily. "Would you have listened?" Really listened without your mother's interference? Eleanor flinched visibly at that comment but remained silent. Alexander turned back to the girls. You said you live in Boston? With your mother? They nodded in unison. She's a doctor. Emma said proudly. Head of pediatrics at Mass General Hospital. Of course she is, Alexander murmured, a faint smile ghosting across his lips. Sophia had always been brilliant, always destined for greatness. James, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. So what happens now, Alex? Alexander looked at the twins, these children who shared his blood, his eyes, his features, and felt a strange mix of terror and wonder. 10 years old. He had missed a decade of their lives. Now, he said quietly, I think I need to make some calls. Starting with finding us all somewhere to stay tonight. He looked directly at Emma and Olivia. And I'd like to hear everything about you two. Everything. For the first time since they'd burst into his wedding, the twins smiled, identical, hopeful smiles that transformed their serious faces into something that squeezed Alexander's heart. The Montgomery Family Library had always been Alexander's sanctuary. As a child, he'd escaped here to read adventure novels. As a teenager, he'd studied for exams under the watchful portrait of his grandfather. As a young executive, he'd formulated business strategies beneath its vaulted ceiling. Now, surrounded by leather-bound volumes and family heirlooms, he scrutinized documents brought by two little girls who had turned his world upside down. These aren't official DNA results, explained Richard Harmon, the Montgomery family attorney who had been summoned urgently to the mansion. The silver-haired lawyer adjusted his glasses as he examined the papers. They appear to be consumer ancestry tests that have been creatively modified to show genetic compatibility. Alexander ran his hand through his hair, disheveled after hours of conversation. How accurate could they be? Potentially very accurate, potentially meaningless, Richard replied carefully. We'll need proper testing. Emma and Olivia sat across from them at the massive oak table, their legs dangling from chairs designed for adults. Despite the late hour and extraordinary circumstances, both girls remained alert and composed. Our science teacher says consumer DNA tests aren't precise enough for paternity, Olivia offered, her tone matter-of-fact. But the genetic markers were compelling enough to justify our investigation. Richard raised an eyebrow at Alexander. Quite a vocabulary for a 10-year-old. Mom says there's no reason to use simple words when precise ones exist, Emma explained proudly. Alexander couldn't help the small smile that formed. That sounded exactly like the Sophia he remembered. Brilliant, precise, unwilling to diminish herself or anyone around her. You mentioned your Aunt Claire helped you, Alexander said, turning back to the girls. She works for the event company? She's the logistics coordinator for Hampton Events, Olivia replied. When we discovered she was assigned to your wedding, we knew it was our opportunity. And how exactly did you discover all this? Alexander pressed gently. The twins exchanged a glance, that silent communication he'd already noticed between them. Mom keeps an old memory box in her closet, Emma began. Last year during spring cleaning, we found it while helping her organize. It had your name on letters, some photos, newspaper clippings about Montgomery investments, Olivia continued. We started researching online after that. Mom never mentioned you, Emma added, a hint of accusation in her young voice. When we asked about our father, she just said he wasn't part of our lives and changed the subject. Alexander felt a pang of guilt, although he hadn't known. Couldn't have known. Or could he? Should he have tried harder to contact Sophia after their breakup? The questions churned in his mind. May I see the photos? He asked softly. Olivia reached into the folder and extracted several faded photographs. Alexander's breath caught as he saw himself, 11 years younger, arm wrapped around Sophia's waist. They stood on Boston Common, autumn leaves swirling around them, both laughing at something forgotten. Another showed them at what appeared to be a medical school function, Sophia radiant in a simple blue dress. I remember this day, he murmured, touching the first photo. Your mother had just aced her board examinations. We celebrated by walking through the common and having dinner at that little Italian place she loved. Giacomo's? Emma asked eagerly. Alexander looked up surprised. Yes, that's it, you know it? It's still Mom's favorite, Olivia confirmed. We go there for special occasions. Daniel Parker entered the library, phone in hand. He'd been Alexander's right-hand man in business and life since Harvard Business School. I've made the calls, he reported. Victoria's not answering, but I've arranged for her things to be collected discreetly. The PR team is preparing statements, and I've booked a suite at the Carlyle for the girls and their aunt tonight. Thank you. Alexander nodded, grateful for his friend's efficiency. He turned back to the twins. Where is your Aunt Claire now? Making calls in the garden, Emma explained. She's trying to reach Mom, but Mom's at a medical conference in Chicago this weekend. Daniel approached the table, studying the photographs Alexander had spread out. It's definitely Sophia Carter, isn't it? That medical student you dated before you took over the company. His expression softened. She's become quite renowned in pediatric medicine now. Her research on juvenile diabetes treatment protocols has been groundbreaking. Alexander's chest tightened. Of course she'd become exceptional. She'd always been destined for greatness. Meanwhile, he'd followed the path laid out for him, building the Montgomery financial empire while something vital remained missing from his life. We should verify everything properly, Richard advised, ever the cautious counselor. Arrange DNA, testing immediately, background checks establish a clear timeline. Alexander noticed both girls stiffen at the attorney's clinical approach. He made a decision, setting aside his legal pad. Richard, Daniel, could you give us a moment, please? Once they'd left, Alexander moved to sit closer to the twins. Emma, Olivia, I want you to know that regardless of what tests show, I appreciate your courage in coming here today. That couldn't have been easy. It wasn't, Emma admitted, but we calculated the variables and determined a direct approach had the highest probability of success. Plus, we practiced our speech 15 times, Olivia added with a small smile. Alexander laughed despite himself. I'm impressed by your thoroughness. You remind me of your mother. She always prepared for everything. Are you mad at us? Emma asked suddenly, vulnerability breaking through her composed facade. For interrupting my wedding? No, Alexander replied honestly. If what you believe is true, and looking at you both, I suspect it is, then you may have saved me from making a serious mistake? Olivia tilted her head. You didn't love her? The bride? The directness of the question startled him. It's complicated. Victoria and I made sense on paper. But love? He shook his head slightly. I'm not sure I've felt that since. He didn't finish the sentence, but the girls' expressions suggested they understood perfectly. Mom keeps your picture in that memory box, Emma said quietly. Sometimes we catch her looking at it when she thinks we're asleep. The revelation hit Alexander like a physical blow. Had Sophia held on to feelings for him all these years? While he built his empire and almost married the wrong woman. Had she been raising his daughters alone, occasionally revisiting memories of their time together? I need to speak with your mother, he said, his voice suddenly hoarse with emotion. There's clearly much we need to discuss. She'll be angry, Olivia warned. Not at you, but at us. And probably at Aunt Claire, too. I'll take full responsibility, Alexander assured them. But first, we need to make some arrangements. It's late, and you both need rest. Tomorrow, we'll start sorting through all of this properly. As the twins gathered their documents, Alexander caught another glimpse of his younger self in one of the photos, standing beside Sophia on the steps of Harvard Medical School. They had looked so happy, so full of promise and possibility. What had gone wrong? And more importantly, could it possibly be made right after all these years? The early morning sunlight streamed through the windows of Sophia Carter's office at Massachusetts General Hospital. Patient files were neatly stacked on her desk, alongside the latest research papers in pediatric medicine. Awards and certificates lined the walls, testament to her rise as one of Boston's premier pediatricians. When her phone buzzed for the 5th time, Sophia finally answered, balancing it between her ear and shoulder as she reviewed a patient's chart. Claire, I only have 5 minutes before rounds. Sophia, we need to talk. Her sister's voice was uncharacteristically tense. It's about the girls. Sophia's hand froze over the chart. What about them? Aren't they at their science camp this weekend? A heavy pause followed. They're in New York with me. New York? Sophia's voice sharpened. What are you talking about? They're supposed to be at Camp Eureka until Sunday. They fabricated the camp documents, Claire admitted. They've been planning this for months. Sophia stood up, her heart racing. Planning what exactly? They found your memory box, Soph. The one with Alexander's pictures. Claire's voice dropped lower. They tracked him down. And yesterday, they crashed his wedding. The room seemed to tilt as Sophia gripped the edge of her desk. They did what? They wanted to meet their father, Claire explained. They created this whole plan and, well, they convinced me to help them. You did what? Sophia's voice rose to a near shout. Several nurses outside her office turned to look through the glass walls. They were determined, Soph. I just helped. To make sure they'd be safe. Claire defended herself. They would have found another way, probably less safe, without me. Sophia closed her eyes, memories washing over her like a tidal wave. Alexander Montgomery. Brilliant, charming, the love she thought would last forever. Until he wasn't. Where are they now? She managed to ask, her voice tightly controlled. At the Montgomery mansion. Alexander wanted to. The Montgomery mansion? Sophia interrupted. You let my daughter stay with people they've never met? With Eleanor Montgomery, who made it crystal clear I wasn't good enough for her precious son? Alexander insisted. Claire explained. And Sophia? He didn't know. About the girls, I mean. He seemed genuinely shocked. Sophia sank back into her chair, the implications hitting her. Of course he didn't know, she whispered more to herself than to Claire. His mother made sure of that. 10 years earlier, Sophia had been a promising medical resident, exhausted but passionate about her work. Alexander had been the charismatic heir to Montgomery Investments, temporarily rebelling against family expectations by dating the scholarship girl, as Eleanor had dismissively called her. When William Montgomery suffered his first heart attack, Alexander had been summoned back to family obligations. Their relationship, once filled with talk of future plans, gradually disappeared under the weight of missed calls and canceled weekends. Then came the pregnancy. Sophia had tried everything: calls, letters, even a visit to the Montgomery offices in New York. All returned or rebuffed. After one particularly devastating rejection at the Montgomery building, Mr. Montgomery is unavailable and requests you stop attempting contact. She'd given up, determined to build a life for herself and her unborn children. I repeatedly tried to contact him when I found out I was pregnant, Sophia said, her voice hollow with old pain. His letters came back unopened. His secretary blocked my calls. I even went to New York once, but security wouldn't let me past the lobby. Claire's silence spoke volumes. I think his mother might have intercepted everything, Sophia. The way he looked when he saw the girls. He truly didn't know. Sophia closed her patient chart with a decisive snap. I'll be on the next train to New York. The girls are fine, Sophia. They're actually enjoying themselves. Alexander has been. I don't care what Alexander has been, Sophia cut her off. Those are my daughters, and they've been raised just fine without Montgomery money or influence for 10 years. She ended the call and pressed her fingers against her temples, trying to steady her breathing. On her desk sat a framed photograph of Emma and Olivia on their 9th birthday. Brilliant, beautiful girls who had her determination and, undeniably, Alexander's blue eyes. What would she say to him after all these years? What could possibly bridge the decade of silence, and how could she explain to her daughters why she'd never told them about their father? Dr. Carter? Her assistant peeked in. Your rounds are starting. I need to take an emergency leave, Sophia said, rising to her feet. Family situation. Please reschedule my patients and call Dr. Patel to cover. As she gathered her things, Sophia's eyes fell on a small plaque on her wall, her first research award from the year the twins were born. She'd accepted it with both babies in her arms, defying everyone who said she couldn't be both a mother and a doctor. She'd fought too hard for her family to let anyone, even Alexander Montgomery, disrupt it now. Guilt wrapped around Alexander, like a physical weight, as he watched Emma and Olivia explore the gardens behind the Montgomery mansion. The morning sun caught their matching dark hair as they examined the rose bushes with scientific curiosity, occasionally conferring in the private language they seemed to share. "They're remarkable children," observed Daniel, who had stayed overnight to help manage the situation. "Smart as whips, too. Emma was explaining string theory to your gardener earlier." Poor man looked completely bewildered. Alexander nodded, unable to take his eyes off the girls. 10 years, Daniel. I've missed 10 years. Daniel placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. "You couldn't have known, couldn't I?" Alexander's voice hardened. "I should have tried harder to find Sophia when she stopped returning my calls. I accepted the company line that she'd moved on, that she understood my family obligations came first." "It's confirmed then?" Daniel asked, studying his friend carefully. "It's definitely the Sophia Carter you dated during your Harvard days?" "Yes," Alexander confirmed. "The brilliant medical student who made me laugh even during finals week. The woman my mother thought was only interested in the Montgomery fortune." He let out a bitter laugh. "She's become a celebrated pediatrician without a cent of our money. Ironic, isn't it?" Daniel cleared his throat. "I did some checking this morning. Dr. Sophia Carter is currently the head of pediatrics at Massachusetts General Hospital. She's published groundbreaking research on childhood diabetes, serves on 3 medical boards, and has received multiple awards for her innovations in patient care. Apparently, she completed her medical residency while raising infant twins as a single mother." Alexander closed his eyes, the magnitude of what Sophia had accomplished alone washing over him. "I should have been there." "Your mother has some explaining to do," Daniel said quietly. "More than some." Alexander's jaw tightened as he recalled his final conversation with Sophia. His father's heart attack had thrust him suddenly into leadership at Montgomery Investments. Eleanor had been relentless in her insistence that he focus solely on saving the company during those critical months. "She's an indebted medical student, Alexander," Eleanor had counseled during a particularly tense evening. "What can she offer you but distraction when the company needs your full attention? When the right time comes, you'll find someone appropriate, someone who understands our world. Like Victoria," he thought bitterly, "the perfect society match who had hidden her own secrets." "I should have fought for her," Alexander admitted, watching as Olivia showed Emma something on a leaf. "I've never stopped thinking about her, you know. Even on my wedding day, there was this emptiness." Daniel's phone buzzed. After checking the message, he looked up with a significant expression. "Your private investigator confirmed it. The twins' birth certificates list father as unknown, but their birth dates align exactly with your relationship with Sophia. They were born 9 months after your father's heart attack and your breakup." Alexander's hand trembled slightly as he reached for the phone. There it was in black and white. Emma Grace Carter and Olivia Claire Carter, born October 15th at Massachusetts General Hospital. 9 months after he'd walked away from the only woman he'd ever truly loved. "She tried to tell me," he whispered, the realization crashing down like a physical blow. "Those calls I never returned. The letters my mother said were handled. She was trying to tell me she was pregnant." Inside the mansion, the door to the library opened. Eleanor Montgomery emerged, her face drawn after a sleepless night. When she spotted Alexander watching the children, she approached cautiously. "They're very well-mannered," she offered, an olive branch in her voice. Alexander turned to her, eyes cold. "Did you know Sophia was pregnant when you intercepted her calls? When you had security block her from seeing me at the office? When you returned her letters marked unwanted contact?" Eleanor paled. "I was protecting you, Alexander. The company was on the brink after your father's heart attack. You needed to focus." "Did you know?" he repeated, each word like ice. His mother looked away, unable to meet his gaze. "I suspected. She became quite insistent about speaking with you directly." Daniel slipped away discreetly as Alexander stared at his mother in disbelief. "You kept my children from me for 10 years, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You allowed me to believe Sophia had moved on, that she understood why our relationship couldn't continue. I did what I thought was best for the family," Eleanor insisted. "For the company. They are my family." Alexander's control finally snapped. "Those little girls out there, they're my flesh and blood, and Sophia? She was the one person who loved me for myself, not for the Montgomery name or fortune." Before Eleanor could respond, Emma and Olivia came running up, excited about something they'd discovered in the garden. They stopped short when they sensed the tension between Alexander and his mother. "Is everything okay?" Emma asked, her perceptive eyes moving between them. Alexander composed himself instantly, forcing a smile. "Everything's fine. What did you two find out there?" As Olivia launched into an explanation about a fascinating beetle species, Alexander caught Daniel approaching with a phone in hand, his expression urgent. "It's Dr. Carter," Daniel said quietly. "She's arrived in New York and is requesting to speak with her daughters immediately." Alexander's heart thundered in his chest. After 11 years, he was about to face Sophia again. Not as the love-struck young man she'd known, but as the father of the children she'd raised alone. The evening descended on the Montgomery estate, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns. Inside, a tentative truce had formed after Sophia's thunderous arrival that morning. Her initial demand to take her daughters home immediately had softened when Emma and Olivia begged for just one more day to get to know their father. "It's not like we have anything urgent in Boston," Emma had reasoned with the precise logic she'd clearly inherited from her mother. "And we've already missed 2 days of school," Olivia added pragmatically. "One more won't matter in the grand scheme of things." Now Alexander stood in the doorway of the estate's music room, watching silently as Eleanor sat at the grand piano with Emma. His mother, typically rigid and formal, had softened visibly as she discovered the girl's interest in music. "Your posture is excellent," Eleanor commented, straightening Emma's wrists slightly. "Who taught you to play?" "Mom started us with lessons when we were 5, Emma replied, her small fingers picking out a melody. "She said music helps develop the mathematical part of the brain." She was absolutely correct, Eleanor nodded approvingly. "I studied piano for 15 years myself. It provides discipline that serves one well in all aspects of life." Alexander observed with wonder how his mother, who had spent the morning being confronted with her decade-long deception, had somehow formed this immediate connection with Emma. The same woman who had deemed Sophia unsuitable was now clearly enchanted by Sophia's daughter. "Your grandmother played this exact piece at her first recital," Alexander commented, finally stepping into the room. Emma looked up, a smile brightening her face. "Really? Mom taught me this one special. She said it was important." The realization struck Alexander like a physical blow. This wasn't just any piece. It was Debussy's Clair de Lune, the same composition he'd been playing the night he first met Sophia at a Harvard fundraiser. She had approached him afterward, complimenting his interpretation, and they'd talked until the event staff began putting away chairs around them. She'd remembered. All these years, she'd kept that memory alive through their daughter. "Where's your sister?" Alexander asked, his voice slightly hoarse with emotion. "Olivia's at the stables with James," Eleanor answered. "Your brother thought she might enjoy seeing the horses." Alexander raised an eyebrow. "Olivia likes horses?" "She's never actually ridden one," Emma explained, continuing to play softly. "But she's read every book about equestrian care in the Boston Public Library. She wants to be a veterinarian." A few minutes later, Alexander found Olivia and James at the Montgomery stables. His brother was showing her how to offer an apple to Midnight, the gentlest mare in their collection. "Keep your hand flat," James instructed. "That's it. She won't bite." Olivia's face lit up as the horse's soft lips tickled her palm. "Her incisors are perfectly adapted for herbivore consumption patterns," she observed scientifically, though her delight was evident. "She knows a lot about horses for someone who's never been around them," James commented as Alexander approached. Books, Olivia explained simply. I read the complete veterinary guide to equine care last summer. For fun? Alexander asked, amused. Of course, Olivia responded, as if it were the most natural summer activity for a 9-year-old. James patted Alexander's shoulder and tactfully retreated, leaving father and daughter alone. Alexander watched as Olivia gently stroked Midnight's nose, completely unafraid despite her inexperience. Your mother, he began carefully. Is she all right with you staying until tomorrow? Olivia considered this. She's not happy about how we went behind her back, but I think she understands why we did it. She looked up at him directly. She's afraid you'll hurt us, or change us somehow. The blunt assessment, delivered so matter-of-factly, caught Alexander off guard. Is that what she told you? No, Olivia shook her head. Mom never says anything bad about you. That's why we had to find you ourselves. But I can tell she's scared, not for herself, for us. Alexander knelt down to meet her eyes, his eyes in her small face. I would never hurt you or Emma, and I certainly don't want to change you. You're both extraordinary, just as you are. Mom made us that way, Olivia said loyally. She taught us to think for ourselves. She did an amazing job, Alexander agreed, far better than I could have done. Olivia studied him with surprising intensity for a child. You really didn't know about us? No, Alexander said firmly. If I had known, nothing would have kept me away. Not my company, not my family, nothing. Later that evening, the unusual group gathered in the Montgomery family room. Eleanor had ordered pizza, a first in the formal dining history of the mansion, after learning it was the twins' favorite Friday night tradition with their mother. Sophia sat slightly apart, alternating between watching her daughters interact with the Montgomerys and checking her phone for hospital updates. Mom, listen, Emma called excitedly from the piano. Grandmother showed me a new way to play the bridge section. Alexander noticed how Sophia tensed at hearing Eleanor called grandmother so quickly, but she masked it with a smile. That's wonderful, sweetheart. As Emma began to play Claire de Lune again, Alexander moved to sit beside Sophia on the window seat. You taught her our song, he said quietly. Sophia didn't look at him. I taught her a beautiful piece of music. The piece that was playing when we met, he persisted. The one you said reminded you of possibilities. For the first time since her arrival, Sophia's carefully constructed walls seemed to waver. She needed to know something of where she came from, even if she didn't know she was learning it. In that moment, watching his daughters, Emma at the piano, Olivia explaining something scientific to a fascinated James, Alexander felt a connection forming that transcended the years of separation. These remarkable children were part of him, and somehow, despite everything, Sophia had made sure they carried a piece of their beginning with them. The Montgomery mansion fell quiet as midnight approached. The twins had finally succumbed to sleep after the emotional whirlwind of the past 2 days, tucked into adjoining guest rooms that Eleanor had hastily but thoughtfully prepared with books and stuffed animals unearthed from Alexander's childhood storage. In the wood-paneled study, Sophia stood by the window, arms crossed defensively as she gazed out at the moonlit gardens. Alexander entered silently, carrying 2 cups of coffee. The tension between them was palpable, a decade of unspoken words hanging in the air. You didn't have the right, Sophia said without turning, her voice low but steady. You didn't have the right to welcome them into your world like this, to let them call your mother grandmother after knowing her for a day. Alexander set the coffee down on the antique desk. They came to me, Sophia. I didn't seek them out. She turned then, her eyes flashing. Because they're children who didn't understand the consequences. But you're an adult who should have known better. You should have called me immediately. Claire was trying to reach you, he reminded her. And the girls needed somewhere safe to stay. Safe? Sophia's laugh was bitter. In the home of a woman who once called me a gold digger to my face, who told me I wasn't Montgomery material? Alexander's jaw tightened. I didn't know any of that happened. Of course you didn't. Sophia ran her hand through her hair, the same gesture he remembered from their late-night study sessions years ago. You were too busy becoming the CEO your father wanted. That's not fair, Alexander countered, struggling to keep his voice down. After my father's heart attack, the company was in freefall. I had responsibilities. So did I. Sophia's control finally cracked. I tried to find you for months when I discovered I was pregnant. Your letters came back marked, "Return to sender." Your calls were blocked. Your security wouldn't let me pass the lobby when I came to New York. Alexander stared at her in shock. What are you talking about? I never received any letters. No one ever told me you came to the office. The study door opened and Eleanor Montgomery stood in the doorway, her face ashen. I intercepted everything, she admitted quietly. The letters, the calls. I told security you were a delusional ex-girlfriend who was harassing Alexander. Her voice trembled. I believed you were just another interested in our money. I was wrong. Sophia's eyes widened in disbelief. You kept my pregnancy from your own son? You denied my children their father for 10 years because of your prejudice? Alexander turned to his mother, his expression thunderous. How could you? Eleanor stepped fully into the room, her usual regal bearing diminished by shame. The company was failing after your father's heart attack. You were working 20-hour days to save it. I convinced myself I was protecting you, protecting our family legacy. She looked directly at Sophia. I was wrong. Seeing those beautiful, brilliant girls today, I was terribly wrong. Silence fell in the study. Sophia's hands trembled slightly as she processed this confession. I never knew, Sophia, Alexander said, his voice breaking. I swear on everything I hold dear, I never knew. The anger in Sophia's eyes gave way to a more complex emotion. Would it have mattered if you had? You'd already chosen your path, Alexander. You made it clear that Montgomery Investments would always come first. That's not true. Alexander moved closer to her. When my father collapsed, I had to step in. The board was moving to replace him, to sell off divisions. Thousands of jobs were at stake. But I never stopped loving you. Yet you never came looking for me, Sophia pointed out. And eventually you got engaged to the perfect society match. I tried to call you after things stabilized, Alexander admitted. Your number had changed. Your friend said you'd moved on. After a year, I stopped trying. He ran his hand through his hair. I thought you didn't want to be found. Eleanor sank into a leather chair, looking suddenly older. That was my doing as well. I had your assistant return calls when you were in meetings, deflect messages. I told myself it was for your own good. While I was working double shifts as a resident physician, caring for premature twins, Sophia said, her voice hollow. Do you have any idea how hard that was? Claire moved in with me for the first year just so I could complete my residency. My parents helped financially until it nearly bankrupted them. I had to fight for every opportunity, prove myself 10 times over because everyone assumed I couldn't be both a mother and a doctor. Alexander's face reflected the pain of those lost years. I would have been there, Sophia. I would have helped raise them. I would have... You can't know that, she interrupted. You can't know what you would have done. I know who I am, he insisted. And those girls out there, they're mine too. I can see myself in them. Not just their eyes or their smiles, but their determination, their intelligence. Sophia's defensive posture softened slightly. They are remarkable, aren't they? Because of you, Alexander acknowledged. You've raised them to be extraordinary. For the first time, a ghost of a smile crossed Sophia's face. They were born that way. I just tried not to get in their path too much. Eleanor rose shakily. I've caused unforgivable harm to all of you. I can't undo the past 10 years, but please know that I will spend whatever time I have left trying to make amends. She looked at Sophia with genuine remorse. Starting with acknowledging that you were always more than good enough for my son. You were simply too independent for my controlling nature to accept. After Eleanor left, Alexander and Sophia stood in weighted silence. The coffee had grown cold, forgotten on the desk. What happens now? Alexander finally asked. Sophia looked toward the staircase, thinking of her sleeping daughters. I don't know, they've found you now. I can't pretend you don't exist anymore. I don't want to disrupt their lives, Alexander said carefully, but I can't walk away either. Not now that I know them. No, Sophia agreed quietly. I don't think any of us can go back to the way things were before. 3 days after the wedding that never was, Alexander sat in his Manhattan office, staring at a calendar that suddenly seemed meaningless. The meticulously planned meetings, the acquisition strategy sessions, the quarterly projections, all felt hollow compared to the revelation of his daughters. The DNA results came in, Daniel said, placing a sealed envelope on the desk. Alexander looked up. That was fast. I called in some favors at the lab, Daniel shrugged. Figured you wouldn't want to wait. Though he already knew what the tests would confirm, Alexander's hands trembled slightly as he opened the envelope. The clinical language swam before his eyes, but the conclusion was unmistakable. Emma and Olivia Carter were, with 99.9998% certainty, his biological children. Congratulations, Daniel said quietly. You're officially a father. Alexander let out a shaky breath. A father who's missed 10 years. His office door opened as James entered, carrying a stack of books. Found these at Barnes & Noble. Parenting preteens. Connecting with your child, and my personal favorite, So You Just Found Out You're a Dad. He dropped them on the desk with a grin. That last one doesn't actually exist, but it should. Alexander picked up the top book, thumbing through pages of developmental milestones he'd missed. First steps, first words, first days of school. I need to reschedule Tokyo, he said suddenly. Daniel frowned. The Nakamura merger? Alex, we've been working on that deal for months. The Japanese team is flying in next week specifically to meet with you. Emma and Olivia have a piano and science recital at their school in Boston on Wednesday, Alexander explained. Sophia agreed to let me attend. I can't miss it. James and Daniel exchanged glances. I can handle the preliminary discussions, James offered. They respect me in Tokyo after the Hatsumoto project. Alexander shook his head. No, I need you to push the entire meeting. Reschedule for the following week. The board won't be happy, Daniel warned. The board doesn't have 10 years of fatherhood to make up for, Alexander replied firmly. From now on, my daughters are my priority. Over the next 3 weeks, the executives at Montgomery Investments watched in bewilderment as their famously dedicated CEO transformed his schedule. Alexander's assistant, Ms. Reynolds, found herself canceling power lunches in favor of afternoon flights to Boston. The corner office where Alexander had often worked until midnight now emptied promptly at 5 on Fridays. He's lost his mind. Malcolm Thornton, the senior board member, muttered after Alexander declined a golf weekend with their biggest investors. Family emergency? Since when does Alexander Montgomery have family emergencies? Since he discovered he has twin daughters, Daniel replied smoothly, having appointed himself the unofficial defender of Alexander's new priorities. In his Boston hotel room, Alexander pored over child development books and parenting forums. Late into the night, his phone contained a new folder of research articles on everything from preteen nutrition to the importance of extracurricular activities. He'd delegated more to his executive team in 3 weeks than he had in the previous 3 years. Meanwhile, Sophia had cautiously agreed to a temporary arrangement. Alexander would visit Boston on weekends, spending Saturday afternoons with the girls while they all adjusted to this new reality. She'd also consented to the DNA test, though her raised eyebrow had clearly communicated that she never doubted the results. I'm not trying to disrupt your lives, Alexander had assured her during a tense conversation in her modest but warm Boston home. I just want to know them, to be part of their lives in whatever way you're comfortable with. Now sitting in the third row of the Westridge Academy auditorium, Alexander felt his chest tighten as Emma took the stage for her piano performance. She wore a blue dress that matched her eyes, his eyes, and though she appeared calm, he recognized the subtle Montgomery tells of nervousness, the slight lift of the chin, the squaring of shoulders. When her fingers touched the keys, transforming, The auditorium with the complex melodies of Beethoven's Für Elise, Alexander fought back unexpected tears. Beside him, Sophia noticed his emotion, and after a moment's hesitation, briefly touched his hand, the first voluntary contact since their confrontation. Later that afternoon, he sat proudly as Olivia's science project on sustainable urban farming won first place. Her detailed presentation, delivered with scientific precision and surprising poise for a 10-year-old, had the judges scribbling notes enthusiastically. "They're amazing," he whispered to Sophia as they watched Olivia accept her blue ribbon. "They are," she agreed, a genuine smile softening her features. "They worked so hard." That evening, Alexander's phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from the office. The Nakamura representatives had arrived early. The board was requesting an emergency meeting. Market fluctuations were affecting their Australian holdings. For the first time in his career, Alexander Montgomery silenced his phone without reading the messages. Instead, he listened intently as Emma and Olivia excitedly recounted their triumphs of the day. Over ice cream sundaes at their favorite local parlor. "Will you come to our birthday next month?" Olivia asked suddenly, her expression serious. "It's our first double-digit birthday. We'll be 11. Alexander glanced at Sophia, seeking permission before answering. Her slight nod gave him the courage to say, "I wouldn't miss it for anything in the world. Even if you have an important meeting?" Emma pressed, clearly having already learned about his demanding profession. Alexander looked directly into his daughter's eyes, the same shade of blue as his own, and made a promise he intended to keep for the rest of his life. "Nothing is more important than being there for you both. Nothing." Later, as he boarded his private jet back to New York, Alexander made a decision. Opening his laptop, he began drafting a comprehensive reorganization plan for Montgomery Investments. One that would free him to spend significantly more time in Boston. "Perdi 10 anos," he murmured to himself, unconsciously echoing Sophia's native Portuguese, a language she'd taught him phrases of during their time together. "Não perderei nem mais dia." I lost 10 years. I won't lose another day. 3 months after the wedding that wasn't, autumn painted the Massachusetts landscape in brilliant hues of red and gold. Sophia stood at her kitchen window watching as her daughters packed overnight bags with uncharacteristic care. "Do you think Grandmother Eleanor will like this sweater?" Emma asked, holding up a navy cardigan. "She mentioned she likes when I dress properly." Sophia bit back her instinctive response. Eleanor Montgomery had been making surprising efforts to connect with the girls, sending thoughtfully chosen books and calling weekly to hear about their activities. "I'm sure she will," Sophia managed, still adjusting to this new reality where her daughters had grandparents they eagerly wanted to impress. The doorbell rang, and Olivia raced to answer it. "He's here." Alexander stood on the porch, casual in jeans and a sweater, a stark contrast to the power suits he'd worn during their relationship years ago. Fatherhood had softened something in him, smoothing the hard corporate edges that had replaced the idealistic young man she'd once loved. "Ready for the weekend?" he asked the girls, helping with their bags. This was the first time Sophia had agreed to let the twins spend an entire weekend at the Montgomery estate. The past months had seen careful, measured visits, Saturday afternoons at museums, Sunday brunches, school events where Alexander sat alongside Sophia in uncomfortable but civil coexistence. "Mom's coming too," Olivia announced proudly. Alexander's surprise was evident as his gaze shifted to Sophia. "You are?" "Just to help them settle in," Sophia clarified quickly. "I'll stay at a hotel nearby. They've never been away from home overnight without me or Claire." In truth, Sophia wasn't ready to let her daughters disappear into the Montgomery world without witnessing it firsthand. Despite Alexander's consistent reliability over the past months, old fears lingered. 4 hours later, Sophia stood awkwardly in the grand entrance hall of the Montgomery mansion, watching as Eleanor welcomed the twins with unexpected warmth. The imperious woman who had once deemed her unsuitable for her son now knelt to embrace her granddaughters. "I've prepared your rooms with books I thought you might enjoy," Eleanor told them. "Emma, There's a collection of classical music scores. And Olivia, I found some fascinating volumes on marine biology that William thought you'd appreciate. William Montgomery appeared in the doorway, looking much healthier than when Sophia had glimpsed him at medical fundraisers years ago. His recovery from heart problems had evidently been successful, though he'd never returned to leading the company. "There are my brilliant granddaughters," he exclaimed, his joy plainly genuine. As the girls were swept away on a tour of the house, Sophia remained in the foyer with Alexander. "They've prepared for this visit for weeks," he said quietly. "My mother redecorated 2 guest rooms personally, something she's never done before. Dad's been collecting science equipment for a laboratory space he's set up in the old conservatory." Sophia nodded, struggling with conflicting emotions. Part of her resented how easily the Montgomerys stepped into grandparent roles they'd forfeited for a decade. Another part recognized the healing this represented for her daughters. They deserved to know their family, she acknowledged. All of their family. Alexander stepped closer. "I know this isn't easy for you. Thank you for letting them come." After a pause, he added, "And thank you for coming too. It means more than you know." Before Sophia could respond, Emma's excited voice echoed from upstairs. "Mom, come see? There's a telescope in my room." As she climbed the grand staircase, Sophia caught herself thinking that perhaps, just perhaps, this weekend might be the beginning of a new chapter for all of them. 4 months after the interrupted wedding, Manhattan's elite had found other scandals to gossip about. The Montgomery Reynolds disaster had gradually faded from page 6, replaced by fresher divorces and corporate meltdowns. Alexander had resumed his position at Montgomery Investments, albeit with a dramatically restructured schedule that puzzled Wall Street observers. The November afternoon turned blustery as Alexander reviewed quarterly reports in his office. His assistant's voice came over the intercom. "Sir, Ms. Reynolds is here to see you." Alexander froze. Victoria. They hadn't spoken since she'd stormed out of the Plaza Hotel ballroom. "Send her in," he said after a moment's hesitation. Victoria entered with the perfect poise she'd always maintained, immaculately dressed in a designer suit, her engagement ring conspicuously absent. "Hello, Alexander," she said coolly, settling into the chair across from him. "Victoria." He nodded. "This is unexpected." "I've had time to process everything," she replied, crossing her legs. "My therapist suggests closure would be beneficial for both of us." Alexander set aside his papers. "I owe you an apology for how everything happened. The girl's timing was dramatic." "Those children saved you from a loveless marriage," Victoria said with surprising frankness. "I've come to offer a proposition." Alexander raised an eyebrow. "What kind of proposition?" "I'm willing to reconsider our engagement," she stated, her tone businesslike. "With conditions, of course. The girls would remain in Boston with their mother. We could arrange appropriate holiday visitations, perhaps 2 weekends monthly. Nothing that would interfere with our social calendar or business commitments." Alexander stared at her, momentarily speechless. "You want to resume our engagement, with conditions about my daughters?" "Be realistic, Alexander," Victoria sighed. "You can't seriously be considering playing weekend father to children you barely know. The Montgomery legacy requires a proper family structure, not this improvised arrangement with some doctor from Boston." The dismissive way she referred to Sophia ignited something protective in Alexander. That some doctor raised brilliant, compassionate children while building a distinguished medical career. And those children aren't negotiable parts of my life, Victoria. Victoria's perfect composure slipped slightly. "You're not thinking clearly. These children have disrupted everything we planned." "Plans change," Alexander replied simply. "The girls didn't disrupt my life. They showed me what was missing from it." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "You're romanticizing fatherhood after a few months of weekend visits. The novelty will wear off. Then what?" "Then I'll still be their father," Alexander stated firmly. Victoria stood abruptly. "There's something you should know, Alexander. Remember when we discussed having children and I said I wanted to wait a few years?" Her smile turned brittle. I had a tubal ligation 2 years ago. I never intended to have children at all. The revelation struck Alexander like a physical blow. You knew how much having a family meant to me. All those conversations about our future children. I told you what you wanted to hear, Victoria admitted without remorse. Children would have interfered with my plans. Your long-lost daughters did me a favor in the end. I was dreading having to stall you indefinitely after the wedding. After Victoria departed, Alexander sat in stunned silence. Their entire relationship had been built on Victoria's calculated deception, just as his estrangement from Sophia had been built on his mother's interference. That evening, as he walked through the gardens at his family estate, Alexander found himself calling Sophia. When she answered, he said simply, "Do you have a minute to talk?" Later they sat on a bench overlooking the rose garden as he recounted Victoria's visit. The moonlight softened Sophia's features as she listened. "Those girls saved me from a marriage built on lies," he concluded. "I've made so many mistakes, Sophia, but I want to do right by them and by you." Sophia studied him thoughtfully. The Alexander I knew in Boston was idealistic, kind, before the corporate world claimed him. I'm starting to see that man again. As they walked back toward the house where the twins were having dinner with Eleanor, Alexander felt something shift between them. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the first glimmer of something new beginning to take root. 6 months into their new family arrangement, winter descended upon New England with particular ferocity. Alexander had established a routine that divided his time between New York and Boston, leasing a comfortable apartment just 3 blocks from Sophia's home. The proximity allowed him to be present for school activities, weekend outings, and impromptu dinners that were becoming increasingly common. Tonight, as forecasters predicted the worst blizzard in a decade, Alexander checked his phone with concern. The power outages had already begun across Boston's neighborhoods, and he knew the twins were terrified of the dark, a fear Sophia had mentioned during one of their increasingly candid conversations about parenting. Without hesitation, he loaded his SUV with emergency supplies, battery-powered lanterns, extra blankets, a portable generator, and groceries. The normally brief drive to Sophia's took nearly an hour through the accumulating snow. When he arrived, the street was already dark, houses barely visible through the swirling white. Sophia opened the door before he could knock, relief evident on her face. "The power went out 20 minutes ago," she explained as he carried supplies inside. "The girls are pretending they're fine, but—" "Dad," Emma called from the living room where she and Olivia had constructed a fort from couch cushions. "Did you bring flashlights? Ours keep flickering." "Better than flashlights," Alexander replied, unpacking the industrial-grade lanterns that cast a warm glow throughout the room. "And I brought hot chocolate, extra batteries, and board games." As the wind howled outside, the 4 of them gathered in the makeshift fort, lanterns creating a cozy sanctuary against the storm. Alexander taught the girls how to play poker using marshmallows as chips while Sophia prepared simple sandwiches in the kitchen by lantern light. "In boarding school, we had blackouts at least twice each winter," Alexander recalled, dealing cards. "My roommate and I would tell ghost stories until the headmaster caught us and confiscated our flashlights." "Were you always getting into trouble?" Olivia asked, organizing her marshmallows with scientific precision. "Not always," Alexander laughed. "But often enough. Your grandfather nearly had a heart attack when I announced I wanted to study art history instead of finance. But you ended up in finance anyway," Emma observed. Alexander's smile faded slightly. "Sometimes life takes unexpected turns." As the evening progressed and the storm intensified, the girls eventually fell asleep in their cushion fort, exhausted from the excitement and wrapped in blankets Alexander had brought. In the kitchen, Sophia made tea by lantern light, the familiar domestic gesture striking Alexander with its simple intimacy. They'd shared so many late nights during her medical school years, him quizzing her on anatomy while she made tea in her tiny apartment. "They're finally comfortable with you," Sophia observed, handing him a steaming mug. "It's good to see." "They're extraordinary children, Sophia," Alexander said quietly. I look at them and wonder how I could have missed a single day of their lives. You're here now, she replied simply. That's what matters to them. As the night deepened and the storm showed no signs of abating, they talked, really talked, for the first time in 11 years. Alexander described the crushing responsibility of saving his father's company, the isolation of leadership, the gradual numbing of his earlier idealism. Sophia shared the terror and joy of learning she was carrying twins, the grueling years of medical residency while parenting, the support, network of friends and family that had sustained her. I would have been there, Alexander said, his voice catching. If I'd known. I believe you, Sophia interrupted softly. I didn't for a long time, but I do now. Outside, Boston disappeared under a blanket of snow, while inside, something long buried began to thaw between them, not the passionate romance of their youth, but something potentially stronger. Mutual respect, shared purpose, and the profound connection of creating two remarkable human beings together. After 8 months of their carefully balanced arrangement, spring brought change to Boston. Cherry blossoms adorned Commonwealth Avenue as Sophia sat in her office at Massachusetts General Hospital, staring at the letter that had arrived that morning. Dr. Carter? Her administrative assistant knocked gently. The board is waiting for your decision about the New York position. Sophia nodded, her thoughts in turmoil. The prestigious New York Children's Hospital had offered her a position as department head, an opportunity that would advance her research on pediatric diabetes treatment and significantly increase her professional standing. The offer had come without Alexander's influence. Her reputation had earned this on its own merit. Yet moving to New York would mean uprooting the girls from the only home they'd known, changing schools and, most complicatedly, altering the delicate co-parenting balance they'd established with Alexander. That evening, as she prepared dinner in her Boston home, Emma and Olivia debated the merits of their science fair projects at the kitchen table. The doorbell rang unexpectedly. "I'll get it," Olivia announced, racing to the door. Alexander stood on the porch, briefcase in hand. Although they had settled into a predictable visitation schedule, spontaneous Wednesday appearances weren't part of it. "I was in Boston for meetings," he explained as he entered. Though Sophia suspected this wasn't entirely true. He'd been making such coincidental visits more frequently lately. After dinner, when the twins retreated upstairs to finish homework, Alexander helped clean up, moving around her kitchen with the ease of familiarity that had gradually developed. "You're unusually quiet tonight," he observed, loading the dishwasher in exactly the way she preferred. Another detail he'd carefully learned. Sophia hesitated, then retrieved the letter from her bag. "I've been offered a position at New York Children's Hospital." Alexander froze momentarily before continuing his task. "That's prestigious. Congratulations." "It would mean moving the girls to New York," she said, watching his reaction carefully. Alexander nodded slowly. "I see." After a moment, he added, "Is that something you're considering?" "I don't know," Sophia admitted. "My career, my research, this is an extraordinary opportunity. But the girls have their lives here, their school, friends, routines." She didn't mention the other complication, that moving to New York would inevitably shift their family dynamic. Alexander would have more access to the twins, which increasingly didn't feel threatening as it once might have. But their carefully constructed boundaries would need redefinition. Alexander dried his hands thoughtfully. "May I say something that might sound selfish?" Sophia gestured for him to continue. "I've completely restructured my life around our current arrangement," he said carefully. "I delegated responsibilities I've never trusted to anyone. I rearranged the company's management structure. I spend half my week in Boston now." His blue eyes, so like the twins, held hers steadily. "I did that not out of obligation, but because I finally understand what truly matters." He stepped closer, his voice softening. "If you moved to New York, the girls would have both parents fully present in their lives. Your career would advance, and I," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "would get to be the father I should have been from the beginning." Sophia felt tears threatening. It's not that simple, Alexander. I've built my independence, my career, my life as their mother without me, he finished gently. I know. And you've done it brilliantly. I'm not asking to take over or change what you've built. I'm just saying that perhaps we could build something new. Together. Later that night, after Alexander left, Sophia found herself on her back porch, staring at the stars and thinking about courage. The twins had shown extraordinary bravery in seeking out their father, risking rejection and disappointment in pursuit of completing their family puzzle. Perhaps it was time for her to show similar courage, not by continuing to maintain the walls she'd built for protection, but by considering a new path forward that none of them had imagined 8 months ago. Theo, Botanical Gardens of New York bloomed with spectacular colors on the twins' 11th birthday. Alexander had arranged a celebration that balanced elegance with childlike wonder. A scavenger hunt through themed gardens, followed by cake in a private pavilion adorned with fairy lights. Emma and Olivia, dressed in matching yellow sundresses. They'd selected themselves, led their school friends through the exhibit halls while their grandparents, William and Eleanor, watched with undisguised pride. Claire, who had become a regular presence at family gatherings despite her initial role in the wedding disruption, helped organize the children's activities. They seem happy, Daniel commented, standing beside Alexander as they watched the celebration unfold. They are, Alexander confirmed, his eyes scanning the crowd for Sophia. He found her examining a display of rare orchids, momentarily separate from the festive chaos. She'd blossomed in her new role at New York Children's Hospital over the past month, her research already attracting attention from the medical community. Sophia, he called softly, approaching her. Could I borrow you for a moment? She followed him through a winding path to a secluded gazebo he'd had decorated with nostalgia in mind. Blue hydrangeas and white gardenias, the same flowers he'd brought to her apartment during her residency years, filled the space with fragrance. Alexander, what is this? She asked, recognizing the flowers immediately. He took her hands, suddenly nervous despite all his preparation. For 10 years I built a financial empire while you created something infinitely more valuable, our family. I want to spend the next 10 years and all the years after building something together. From his pocket, he produced a simple sapphire ring, not ostentatious like Victoria's diamond had been, but thoughtfully chosen to match Sophia's preference for understated elegance. This isn't because of convenience or the girls, he clarified. It's because finding you again has reminded me who I really am, who I want to be. Sophia's eyes glistened as she looked at the man before her, not the corporate titan or Montgomery heir, but the person she'd glimpsed emerging over these months of shared parenting, midnight conversations, and rediscovered connection. 6 months. After Alexander's proposal in the garden gazebo, a very different wedding took place from the lavish Plaza Hotel affair that had been interrupted a year earlier. This celebration unfolded on the grounds of a new home. Not the imposing Montgomery mansion, but a warm, spacious residence in Connecticut that Alexander and Sophia had chosen together, halfway between Boston and New York. The spring afternoon blessed them with perfect weather as Emma and Olivia processed down an aisle of wildflowers, scattering petals with scientific precision. At 11 and a half, they'd grown taller, their Montgomery blue eyes shining with happiness. Claire, as Sophia's maid of honor, beamed with vindication. Her interference had ultimately led to this day. Daniel stood beside Alexander, having witnessed his friend's remarkable transformation from driven CEO to devoted father and partner. In the front row, Eleanor and William watched with genuine joy. The past year had seen Eleanor form a real relationship with her granddaughters, and more surprisingly, with Sophia. The former adversaries had found common ground in their shared love of medicine, as Eleanor, once a nurse before marrying into the Montgomery fortune, discovered Sophia's groundbreaking research. As Sophia walked toward Alexander, she wore not a traditional white gown but a simple, elegant blue dress that matched her daughter's eyes. Her medical colleagues from both Boston and New York filled several rows. colleagues who had supported her through years of single motherhood, now witnessing this unexpected new chapter. When they exchanged vows, Alexander's voice resonated with certainty. Our family wasn't built in the traditional way, but it's stronger because of the trials it overcame. Sophia's response came with equal conviction. We found our way to each other twice, once through chance and once through the courage of our daughters. This time, we build our future with eyes wide open. The celebration that followed was intimate and joyful, filled with laughter rather than society photographers. The extravagant champagne fountains and ice sculptures of Alexander's previous wedding attempt were replaced by homemade desserts contributed by friends and simple, meaningful touches that reflected their reconstituted family. As dusk fell and fairy lights illuminated the garden, the twins performed a duet they'd practiced for months. Emma on piano, Olivia on violin, their gift to parents who had found their way back to each other through the most unexpected detour. 2 years after the garden wedding, the Montgomery Carter household bustled with the controlled chaos that only a family with teenagers and a toddler could generate. Thomas Carter Montgomery, now 18 months old with his mother's dark curls and his father's blue eyes, tottered determinedly after his older sisters through the sunlit kitchen of their Connecticut home. Tommy, stay out of my science project. Olivia, now 13, scooped up her little brother just before his curious fingers reached the elaborate ecosystem model she'd constructed for the regional science competition. He's just showing scientific curiosity, Emma teased, not looking up from the complex piano piece she was annotating at the breakfast table, like his big sister. Alexander entered from his home office, scooping Thomas into his arms with practiced ease. The transformation from corporate titan to hands-on father was complete. While he still served as chairman of Montgomery Investments, he'd restructured the company leadership to allow him the family time he'd missed with the twins. Are we ready for the big day? He asked, referring to the twins' 13th birthday celebration planned for that afternoon. Sophia emerged from the adjoining room where she'd been on a conference call. Her leadership of the Pediatric Diabetes Research Center at New York Children's Hospital had recently earned national recognition, and the treatment protocols she'd developed were being implemented in hospitals across the country. The cake is being delivered at 2, your parents are arriving at 3, and Claire is bringing the decorations she smuggled past the girls, she confirmed, smiling at her daughter's excitement. The birthday party brought together the extended family they'd built. Eleanor and William, now fully embracing grandparenthood and retirement, arrived bearing thoughtfully chosen gifts. Eleanor had selected rare sheet music for Emma, while William had found vintage scientific volumes for Olivia. Claire, now engaged to Daniel after a relationship that had blossomed during family gatherings, coordinated the celebration with her professional event planning expertise. As evening approached and the celebration continued on the back patio, Alexander found Sophia watching their children with a contemplative expression. "Penny for your thoughts, Dr. Montgomery Carter," he asked, slipping an arm around her waist. "I was just thinking about how life takes unexpected turns," she replied, leaning into him. "If someone had told me 3 years ago that we'd be here, like this, I would have said they were delusional." Alexander chuckled. "If someone had told me I'd have a teenage daughter explaining quantum physics to me, while another composes music that moves me to tears, and a toddler who thinks my tie collection exists solely for his amusement, I wouldn't have believed it either." Across the patio, Eleanor was deeply engaged in conversation with Sophia's parents, who had moved from Brazil to a nearby town after Thomas was born. The formerly imperious Montgomery matriarch now exchanged grandparenting strategies with the same woman she had once deemed unsuitable for her son's social circle. At the dessert table, Alexander's brother James was animatedly discussing equestrian terminology with Olivia, who had developed her bookish interest in horses into actual riding lessons at a nearby stable. As evening fell and the extended family gathered around the fire pit on the patio, little Thomas dozed in Alexander's arms, while the twins sat together on a garden bench, whispering and giggling as only sisters could. "What's your greatest accomplishment?" Daniel asked the birthday girls during a lull in conversation. 13 is a milestone. You're officially teenagers now." Emma and Olivia exchanged one of their telepathic glances before Emma answered, "Finding our dad," with complete certainty, and "showing the adults that sometimes kids know what's best," Olivia added with the confident wisdom that had characterized her even at 10. Alexander and Sophia exchanged looks of profound gratitude for the two young detectives who had possessed the courage to crash a wedding and reunite a family that was meant to be together. Later that night, after guests had departed and the children were asleep, Alexander and Sophia stood on their back porch, the Connecticut stars spread above them in a tapestry of possibilities. "Remember when you told me you'd restructured your entire life for us?" Sophia asked softly. "That night in Boston when I was considering the New York position?" Alexander nodded, remembering the pivotal conversation that had ultimately led to their reunification. "I was so afraid of losing my independence, of the girls becoming attached to a father who might not stay committed," she admitted. "I couldn't have been more wrong. We all took a risk," Alexander reminded her. "You entrusting me after all those years, me in learning to be a father overnight, the girls in finding me in the first place. Some risks are worth taking," Sophia said, glancing back at their home where their 3 children slept safely. "This family we've built, it's stronger precisely because we had to fight for it, to choose it deliberately rather than falling into it." Alexander kissed her gently under the stars, thinking of all the board meetings he'd canceled, all the business trips he'd delegated, all the moments of corporate glory he'd willingly sacrificed, and how insignificant those sacrifices seemed compared to the richness of the life they'd created together. The twins were right, he murmured against her hair. "Sometimes the children do know best. Don't let them hear you say that." Sophia laughed softly. "They're 13 now. They already think they know everything." Alexander smiled, knowing that whatever challenges teenagehood might bring, they would face them together, a family complete at last.